Hello, beautiful people. My name is Emma.
And I'm MC.
And we are your hosts of the G-Forces podcast. So, this week we are going to be talking about the history of Ferrari, and I'm going to be talking about the career / just like life of Lewis Hamilton. We figured just because of Lewis going to Ferrari and Ferrari kind of being Ferrari, it would be a good idea to just kind of go over the history and how this really is something that's very monumental in motorsport as a whole. So that's going to be one of the big things that we go over. Before I let MC talk, I did, for those who are watching us on the video format, I did want to show y'all the Lego car that if you listen to the last episode, we were building a car. For those who watched it on video, I know that the lighting was really bad, okay? So you couldn't really see anything. I couldn't fix it. We hopefully have fixed it forever. We did a lot to hopefully manage it. It looks like the lighting is significantly better this time around, and hopefully it stays that way forever. But you never know. So you can see the car now. So for those who are watching on YouTube, this is the car. I finished it yesterday.
Do you need to do the influencer hands?
No. I finished it yesterday. It took a while, and it's actually much larger than the other F1 cars that we have for like a Lego set. Don't really know why. Not mad about it. And I'm interested. I think that the McLaren ones are not the same because it looks like the McLaren ones have
less pieces,
and it looks like they have a little person in the car. So I think the McLaren ones are like the ones that Chris already built.
Oh, okay.
I think that
so
this
like a
Mercedes
fleet.
one is different. Don't know why. But we'll have a full fleet of cars. So yeah. Mary Catherine, you can talk now.
Yeah, no, I just think we're trying to figure out kind of episodes to bring to you guys in this interim period. And there's so much out there about Ferrari. I mean, the past 2-3 years, it's been the Adam Driver Ferrari movie with Lady Gaga.
Yeah.
I mean, prior to that, you had Rush with Hemsworth and what's his name about Lauda.
Yeah.
And
then you had Ford versus Ferrari,
which dealt with the Le Mans team and stuff like that. So there's Ferrari has been such a prolific thing in the media, and I think it's just so heightened right now because, unknown to me until I did the research, it's been quite a while since they've had a constructor or a driver's championship.
When was the last time?
I think in 2007, 2008. So, it's been a bit.
I think that was Kimmy.
Mm-hmm. And so, for me, just, researching it, but then also just kind of, for those listening in, this is going to be a very high-level view, and it's going to focus a little bit more on, Enzo Ferrari's journey and, the journey of the team, and not really focus on, the accolades. It will touch upon it, but just so you know, I kind of wanted to just go over, the history on, how Ferrari is Ferrari today. And so, yeah, it was just really interesting to hear about his early life, how he became where he became. Just an Italian team and an Italian car manufacturer going through both world wars, it's just interesting to research from my perspective.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
I didn't think about it either, and then all of a sudden,
was their factory changed at all to weapons manufacturing?
It moved locations, and it was involved in supplying, so we'll get to that.
In Italy?
We'll get to it.
We'll
get to it.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I think there's just, so much about Ferrari, for new listeners. It can be a little overwhelming, especially because, the Tifosi is so, loved and appreciated, and
we do love the Tifosi, but it can make things hard for fans sometimes.
Yeah, and I think for new fans too, it can be a little intimidating. But yeah, this is just kind of tidbits and the history of it. So yeah, I'm excited to look into it.
Before we get started, I do want to mention there are a bunch of videos that have come out with teams finally starting up again. So there is a video on Ferrari's YouTube page where I'll probably link it in the description for YouTube. But it is Lewis's like first days at Ferrari, and you get to see him finally in a Ferrari car and like walking around being Lewis. And then Williams just came out with a video of Carlos and Alex back at it again, and they did some testing back in Barcelona. And I think that I wasn't worried, but I think that Carlos and Alex are going to be very good teammates. I think that they are more similar than a lot of other teammates that they've had. That like I think that their minds think very similarly.
I also just think it's the same thing that everyone's been saying. Like, I think he's a very adaptable driver.
Yeah, Carlos adapts.
I think he adapts with every team. He, to my knowledge, has had decent, public facing relationships with his teammates. And like, I think, how do you go from a team like Ferrari to any other team, right?
Yeah.
And so I understand the struggle, but, everyone that's been watching us understands, like, the sweet spot that Williams has in our heart. And so, like, I was nothing but excited when this was announced, and everyone online was like, oh, God, like, this is the end of his career. And I was like, no, I actually think we're going to see him, like, fully come into a role of, like, I wonder.
I would have so much joy if Carlos and Alex worked together to bring back like Williams prime.
Yes, but I also just wonder too if we're gonna see kind of like, Carlos is not a spring chicken. Not saying that like he's old. I mean, look at Alonso and Hamilton. Like they've been around for quite a few runs, and so like I'm not saying Carlos is like looking to leave, but I also wonder if this just like collaboratively every interview I've seen him talk about his move to Williams, it just seems like there just seems to be like a little bit more creativity, and he seems to have his hands in more things. I also just think every team has, I mean, look at Ferrari, like after doing this research, every team has dry spells. Like yeah, they could be winning, whereas Williams isn't necessarily winning, but they're not winning the big cheese,
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm excited. I was happy to see those interviews and hope the positivity and like the excitement continues.
Agreed. All right, we are going to get into the history of Ferrari. We always do like little breaks in between each segment, which you probably already have figured out at this point. If you're new to the podcast, we do take breaks in between little everything.
Oh, also before we continue, shout out the new intro. Are you using it
Oh
for this
yeah.
video?
We'll have a new intro.
For those that
watch. So we technically hold that thought. We technically had a new intro in the first video of the year, and it was like a little cartoon. And I wasn't the biggest fan of it, but I just wanted to try something different. And then I was like, wait, we have so much content. We've been doing this for a year and a half now. Why don't I do something with our faces in it, actually, with our own videos? So yeah, that's why we have a new intro. Hopefully we'll have new music at some point, if we can get one of our musical friends to help us out.
Yeah, thanks, Dad.
Yeah.
Still waiting on that music, Dad, if he even listens, which I know he doesn't, so I can say this.
But in between takes, I remembered that we still have when we ordered these Ferrari hats, the one that I have on, when they came in the mail, it came with a little Ferrari bag.
If you ordered directly from like Ferrari's like shop on their website, not through like F1, you like it comes with like their little, which I'm sure is like something if you like buy a Ferrari, you get Ferrari merch.
That makes sense. But because we're talking about Ferrari, I figured why not have it on the table?
Yeah.
So
yeah. We love to keep bags.
Yes. Okay, MC, go.
Okay, so to begin talking about Ferrari, I think we really need to like look into Enzo, who is Enzo Ferrari, the founder. So Enzo was born on February 18th, 1898 in Modena, Italy. And his early passion for cars began when he would go to Bologna circuit with his dad and his older brother. It was just him and his older brother, and then his mom and dad. The time of World War I would see him lose not only his father, but also his brother, and he himself suffered from the Spanish flu, which if anyone knows World War I history, or, shout out Downton Abbey. It was running rampant at this time.
Or Twilight.
Oh my God, yes. Or Edward Cullen, who succumbed to it as well. And so he was ultimately dismissed from the front after like dealing with the Spanish flu. And in post-World War I, Enzo needed to figure out what he was going to do. He would seek work with a car company. I think it was Fiat he would seek work with. And he didn't land the role at Fiat, but he ended up landing a testing role for just like a small little auto company. And so he would move on from tester to then becoming a racing driver, and he would make his debut in 1919 in like an uphill race in Italy. In 1920, Enzo would become a driver with a little team we all might recognize, or if you're new, you might not recognize, a team called Alfa Romeo. This began what was subsequently like a not as long as like I feel like Fiat with Ferrari, but Alfa Romeo and Ferrari had like a relationship for a handful of years at the beginning of Ferrari's, really up and coming in the car world. And so in 1923, we see what becomes like we see the birth of what becomes an international symbol, the Ferrari prancing horse. So for some background on the Ferrari prancing horse, Enzo had met with the Baracca Counts, a prominent family whose son, Count Francesco Baracca, was one of the most prolific aerial fighters for Italy in World War I. He had like massive feats to his name, and his parents, because unfortunately he ended up losing his life in one of these aerial campaigns during World War I. His parents approached Enzo Ferrari. They're counts in the Italy royalty structure, so they're of prominent situations, and I feel like people at that time were always at auto shows and car racing and whatnot. And they approached Enzo and were like, would you like to use our son's coat of arms, which was a prancing horse?
Oh, that makes so much sense. I
And
was
so
like, where are you going with this?
is where the Ferrari prancing horse comes from, is this Count Francesco Baracca. Look him up. An incredible, Italian war hero who unfortunately lost his life really young and is now kind of memorialized on this team and in these cars. So I thought that was really interesting because it's not really talked about it, and I thought, the more you know. So, Enzo would use this, and today we still see it for the indefinite future. In the early 1930s, Enzo was still a racing driver, but him and his wife, he got married around this time in the 20s. Him and his wife were expecting a son, so he decided to step away from the role of racing driver. From everything I can tell you, Alfa Romeo and Ferrari had a very on and off again relationship throughout the years. And so from what I can tell, Alfa Romeo did the cars, like they made the cars, and Ferrari did the team. So Ferrari was the guy who like brought the team members in. He kind of created like this Ferrari society.
And he was like the manager?
Yeah.
Okay.
In 1937, Alfa Romeo bought the majority portion of Ferrari, and according to the internet, they bought this for 131. It was like in, I think, whatever Italy's currency was at that time, which I think might have been liars. I could be wrong.
Yeah, because Italy didn't become Italy until
this
World
is still,
War I.
I think, the euro wasn't used.
Yeah, but Italy didn't become Italy until around World War I.
Yeah, and so we're in the 30s.
Yeah, okay.
We're like entering into World War II.
Cool.
And so according to the internet, they bought this for, I put this in American dollars, $131,600, which when I put it into like an inflation calculator, which there's like 8 million, take it with a grain of salt, it came out to close to like $3 million, which I mean, that's like a lot of money in 1937.
For a majority stake of the company?
Yeah. But thank Ferrari, F1 doesn't exist. They're like, who knows how big they were, if they were really international, if they were just on Italian standards. But he still was able, so they did this because they wanted to bring the side of like racing more in-house. That's why Alfa Romeo bought it. And at this point, they were just pretty heavily the manufacturer, and they did keep Enzo on as an advisor. So it's like at that point, they're going to give me this giant payout. I'm still the advisor. Why not?
Yeah.
Right? Well, in 1939, Enzo and Alfa Romeo parted ways.
Okay.
Apparently Alfa Romeo claimed it was a mutual agreement, but Ferrari later stated he was basically kicked out. I mean, it's not like we haven't seen these types of relationships end this way before.
Yeah.
So now that Scuderia Ferrari, it was
How did you just say the word?
Scuderia?
Scuderia.
Scuderia, thank you. I'm reading notes, a million notes.
Scuderia.
Now that Ferrari was no longer in Enzo's hands, and the fact that he has a boatload of cash, it was time for him to move on to his next project. So he created what was known as the Auto Avio Costruzioni, or the AAC, and this would become eventually Ferrari SPA, which I think is the actual official name of Ferrari, the company.
Yeah, I think AAC is at the end of the name of you see it on the papers.
So Enzo couldn't rebuild for a bunch of years using the Ferrari Scuderia name because of their deal with Alfa Romeo and what they bought. And so this was the workaround. And the AAC would begin building and repairing cars, but also supplied the Italian military during World War II. We listen and maybe we do judge just a little bit.
We definitely do judge.
But they're not the only only modern day company that had
every company that
interesting
made bad
ties
choices
during
like that,
World
we
War
judge.
II. The first ever car to come fully developed and manufactured by Ferrari via the AAC was the Tipo 815. Look it up. It is beautiful. It's the car I showed you this morning.
It's very nice.
Oh my, I literally said to Emma, I was like, guys, I get it. I get why human males feel the need to put cars on their walls. It was a beautiful, I would want a picture of that somewhere.
Yeah, if I were an F1 Ferrari driver, I would not want a modern day Ferrari. They're nice, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, I'll take a Ferrari, but if I had
the option between with whatever Ferrari car I wanted, why would you not choose a vintage Ferrari? That's crazy to me.
Yeah. So this was created for the 1940 for the Mille Miglia, which was a Italian street race. It doesn't exist anymore. It was an Italian road race. It would be a driver and a navigator. And I don't think it did that well. But, we moved past it.
It's fine.
As we know, when people think of Italy and Ferrari, they think of Maranello, not Modena, where a lot of this history has been taking place, everything I've been talking about. Italy was in the middle of World War II, and quite a lot happened within Italy. If you don't know, go look it up. Italy had quite a lot going on. Enzo was anticipating that Modena would be attacked, which it ended up being attacked. So that is when, in 1942, he decided to move the company to Maranello, which is where Maranello becomes so prominent.
Modena is also where the Emilia Romagna, the Imola circuit is, and I think that is in the region, or I think the closest city to them is Modena.
Okay.
I could be completely wrong.
Yeah, I
think I'm correct though.
Well, he moved it to Maranello in 1942. It still got bombed twice. But, Maranello ended up becoming this with all this being said, this moment kind of locked in the relationship between Ferrari and Maranello. For those that don't know, Maranello becomes the company's headquarters and is still there today. And the cars are still manufactured there 83 years later.
It's actually very cool to see the headquarters online, even just in videos, because you have the newer teams that have these massive complexes that very much feel almost like a Google campus, where the Ferrari one is
in an Italian
historical.
Town.
It's very cool.
I think the other thing is realizing that it's been in the same town for 83 years, and this is something that some of the drivers and some of the team principals have talked about. You have going on 3 generations
you have
of
people
families.
Who probably their grandparents
worked there.
They are now working there.
And so just remember that. That there is, and this is why the Tifosi is as important as I think it is because of this, because of the fact that it's 83 years later with, you know, a few decades prior to just being fully Italian,
Yeah.
you know? Um, Building and designing an original car takes quite a bit of time even today, and while the move happened in 1942, Ferrari would not release an entirely designed and manufactured car out of Maranello until 1947, creating the Ferrari 125S. It was a V12 engine, which is what Ferrari is known for, and secured Ferrari's first GP victory in the same year. As we know, F1 doesn't exist yet, so this wasn't like a Formula 1, it was just a Grand Prix. 1950 saw the birth of the Drivers' Championship and subsequently Formula 1, and Ferrari enrolled his team into the inception year. Ferrari won their first Grand Prix in Formula 1 when Jose Froilan Gonzalez won Silverstone in 1951. Alberto Ascari brought the first championship titles to Ferrari in 1952 and 1953. And fun fact, Ferrari only participated in the Indy 500 once. They entered Ascari into it in 1953 and he crashed on the 41st lap and they never attempted again. Understandable. The 1950s and just like a lot of the other decades, but I think the 1950s and the 1960s kind of take the cake for like the darkest side of I think Ferrari history in my
I would agree.
opinion. And I didn't want to like talk about every year and then talk about all the deaths, which again is not like I'm not trying to disrespect the drivers. We have talked about some of these drivers before. It's just I don't know. It was like every year, every decade of history was like, here's all their accolades, and then here's all the drivers that died in a Ferrari. And so, like, I talk about some of it, but not all of them. So I want you to understand, like, I do acknowledge and, like, respect the drivers that did lose their lives. It's just, there's only so much death we can talk about in an episode, in my opinion.
Unfortunately, from what we have learned throughout all this research, is that during this time period and Ferrari, there was an expectation and just an expectation for
I think in F1
you.
in general, just like
Yeah.
they're not only Ferrari, I think Ferrari is just kind of like the prime example because of the quotes that like have been so like, stamped into history. But I think like you just have to remember that up until really, in my opinion, like the last like 15 years, like F1 drivers walked hand in hand with death every time they
Yeah,
got on the
like
grid.
there used to be probably at
Yeah.
least one driver every year who would pass away.
Yeah. So Ferrari lost Alberto Ascari in 1955, Eugenio Castellotti, Luigi Musso, and Peter Collins between the years of 1957 and 1958, and they lost Alfonso de Portaga during the 1957 Mille Miglia. This last crash killed Portago or I'm sorry if I'm butchering his name, his navigator and 9 spectators, and changed Italian motorsport forever, outlawing racing on public roads and calling an end to the Mille Miglia. The Italian government took legal action against Ferrari, the tire manufacturer, and even had Enzo Ferrari face manslaughter charges that were eventually dismissed in 1961. Now, everyone can have their opinions, but this is something that past, like, racers really spoke about, and Emma kind of talked about. Like, there was always a feeling that, like, being in Ferrari, you kind of had to risk your life. Like, I think Phil Hill kind of, like, has the most, like, prominent, like, I wasn't willing to kill myself,
Well,
you
and there was the
know?
one guy who you did it at the end of the year last year who went to our high school
Mm-hmm.
and he raced on Ferrari for 2 races and he was like, I'm not putting up
Yeah.
with this.
No.
And he left.
Um, Ferrari at the same time during all of this death, unfortunately, did lose his son in 1956 at the age of 25 due to muscular dystrophy. Uh, his son, whose nickname was Dino, was being set up literally as the successor of Ferrari. He was credited with designing the 750 Monza and created a lot of like I didn't really want to speak about this side, but I don't think you can talk about Enzo Ferrari without talking about the fact that this is a man who is like historically known as a womanizer. Him and his wife, I mean, go watch the Adam Driver movie. It's just filled with, not a happy marriage. And at the same time that this was happening, like his son had died, and I think around the same time it had come out that he had a son out of wedlock with another woman. And so like I think this just like created like a lot of strife in his personal life, which, you know, I'm sure we could do an entire episode on this man's personal life. But anyways, unfortunately he lost his son at this time as well. So the 1950s was kind of a dark mark, I feel like, in Ferrari history as a whole. The 1960s saw continued expansion along with unfortunate tragedy that befalls motorsport. You know, lost a handful of drivers. We've talked about it before. The 1960s also saw the Von Trapp's Monza accident that was like super super deadly. But Ferrari was able to win 2 constructors championships in 1961 by Phil Hill and then in 1964 by John Surtees. They continued to dominate at the Le Mans as well, which is something that they were racing in. They had a few other motorsports divisions. 1969 saw Enzo work out an $11 million deal with Fiat that included the sale of the road car business, but did leave 50% of like Ferrari underneath Enzo, which I'm assuming included the F1 team. The 1970s started off rough for Ferrari, but they did eventually sign a little driver named Niki Lauda, and in 1974 they started to find their momentum. 1975 saw Lauda win the Drivers' Championship, and Ferrari would come away with the Constructors' Championship as well. 1976 was the infamous Lauda crash that resulted in severe burns and him taking a few races off. And while he wasn't able to win the championship, which went to James Hunt that year, they still were able to walk away with the constructors, which was like an insane feat, especially with, you know, how horrific Lauda's crash was. Enzo would remain president of Ferrari until 1977, and I was trying to figure out what he did, if he like stepped down or became a different role, and I couldn't deep dive fast enough and like to figure out, but you know, the guy was still like, he was still around for 11 more years, so he was involved in Ferrari. 1979 was the last drivers' championship that Enzo would see in his like, or no, I don't know why I wrote it like that. It might not have been the last one he saw in his life, but I think for a while. Oh, yeah, that's why. 1979 would be the last Drivers' Championship that Ferrari as a team would see, and this was accomplished by Jody Scheckter. They would wait another 21 years for their Drivers' Championship when we would enter the Schumacher years. Gilles Villeneuve showed great promise of bringing more wins for Ferrari in 82, but unfortunately was killed in an accident during the Belgian Grand Prix in May of that year. Then in August, his teammate Didier Pironi had a horrific accident that basically caused him to walk away from F1. It was massive injuries to his legs, and so he wouldn't race again. The last Constructors' Championship that Enzo saw while he was alive was for the 1983 season. Enzo at this point was in his late 80s, and in 1988 in Maranello, Enzo passed away at the age of 90 due to leukemia. Post his death, the team really seemed to be in a dry spell, and it wasn't until Ferrari signed Michael Schumacher in 1996 that a lot of people feel the team saw a resurgence in domination. From 2000 to 2004, Schumacher brought in 5 drivers' titles, along with the team winning 6 constructors' titles that went from 99 to 04. The most recent Drivers' Championship won by Ferrari was accomplished in 2007 by Kimi Räikkönen, and they would also win 2 more Constructors' titles in 2007 and 2008. And leading up into what Emma will discuss, you know, who knows what the next title is for Ferrari. So that's high level, a bit about Forenzo, a little bit about Enzo,
Ferrari.
and a little bit about Ferrari.
Okay, well, I am now going to get into the career/life history of Lewis Hamilton. Lewis, it was hard to do some of the research on Lewis because I didn't want to just tell y'all everything you guys already know. But I was thinking about it more in the sense that, like, we started this podcast because we really liked the history of it, and we wanted to be a space for people to learn and make it accessible, because the research isn't always the most accessible. For Lewis, the research is
Yeah,
very
it's
accessible.
very accessible.
So you can just read all of this online. There's a bunch of very easy, obvious websites. But I went into this more of like, what if they don't want to have to do the research? So here we go. Lewis was born on January 7th, 1985 in Stevenage, England, which is about 20-30 minutes outside of London.
It is weird, just to interrupt you talking about it, because it's like he's not that.
I know.
Like everyone else we talked about was like,
Old.
I mean, Enzo was in the
Or dead.
1800s.
His full name is Lewis Carl Davidson Hamilton. When he was
Carl!
born, I know that one was crazy. Current records that he holds, he's currently tied with Michael Schumacher for seven title wins, most in history. He's also the first ever black driver to win a World Drivers' Championship. And then I think he's also technically the most successful British driver of all time. So, his father, Anthony, which you'll see at races, his parents, Anthony's parents, immigrated to England from Grenada in the 1950s. His mom, Lewis's mom, Carmen, and his dad, they divorced when Lewis was 2. He lived with his mom until he was about 10 years old, and then he moved in with his dad, his stepmom, Linda, and his 3-year-old stepbrother named Nicholas. Nick, you'll see sometimes he has cerebral palsy, and Lewis has been quoted many times about how he finds Nick's cheerful bravery to be very inspirational. So Lewis began racing when he was 8 years old. His dad, who was his mentor and manager, had to work day and night, even worked 3 jobs at one point to finance Lewis's career. His first race was with a well-used go-kart that cost almost a month's wages for his family.
Which also just like puts it into some perspective how expensive this sport is.
Yeah.
Like for the regular, like average Joe.
Yeah. It also makes it make a lot of sense why a lot of the dads are the mechanics for the kids, for the carts. Because you're
Just the
spending this much
expense.
money on the cart, you're going to be the one watching it.
Yeah.
His dad actually had him in a yellow helmet to better spot him on crowded tracks, and now that's kind of become his signature, a yellow helmet. Also, his childhood hero, Ayrton Senna, did have a yellow helmet as well. So, at 10 years old, he won the British Karting Championship while wearing a borrowed race suit and shoes. Because everything was just so expensive. At the Motorsport Awards ceremony in London that year, 1995, his dad had prepared him with an autograph book, and Lewis approached Ron Dennis, who was the boss of McLaren Mercedes Formula One team at the time. And this is a quote from Lewis. I said, "Hello, Mr. Dennis. I'm Lewis Hamilton, and one day I'd like to race for your team." I asked him for his autograph and his phone number. He put them in my book and also wrote, "Call me in 9 years." This is a continued quote from the F1 website article, just because I felt like it, yeah. The call was made just 3 years later, and it was the Hamilton household telephone that rang. It was Ron Dennis who presented Anthony with an offer to financially support his son's career for the foreseeable future, with the proviso that Lewis should keep working hard at school. And Lewis, quote, "I just went upstairs to my room and got on with my homework. It was so unbelievable. I struggled to take it in."
Just got on with my homework.
There was a lot of pressure then to achieve great things due to this investment, and also just him being somewhat very successful already at that age, and being a person of color, and not coming from a rich family. It was a very big deal. He won 8 championships in 6 years of karting, a prodigy. He won the Formula 3 Euro Series and then the GP2 Series Championship in 2006. Just a reminder that GP2 is now Formula 2, so he was the F2 championship for his year. The GP2 Series, he won 5 out of the 21 races, and he had several successes from the back of the pack, and that moved him from the back of the pack when he like started the back and then moved forward throughout the pack. From the back of the pack to the podium, that is what particularly prompted McLaren to promote him to the Formula One team. In 2007, Lewis Hamilton was on the McLaren Formula One team with teammate Fernando Alonso, who at that point had already won his 2 World Drivers' Championships in 2005 and 2006 with Renault. I didn't realize his championships were with Renault, to be honest. I thought it was with some rando team. Renault makes sense, I guess. Lewis Hamilton barged onto the podium a dozen times. He won 4 races and led the championship for 5 months and lost it by merely a single point in the final race to Ferrari's Kimi Räikkönen in his debut season.
1 point.
I know. Lewis's debut was the only good thing for McLaren that year, though. Alonso and Lewis were not on good terms. Fernando assumed that Lewis would be the second driver, essentially. Fernando left the team at the end of this year partially due to the spy scandal, which we all know about, where McLaren had been found guilty of possessing Ferrari technical secrets, which is literally insane. McLaren was fined $100 million.
Have we done a deep dive on that, by the way?
I think we've mentioned it. I don't think we did a deep dive, though. McLaren was fined $100 million and stripped of all its points in a Constructors' Championship, and which it would have otherwise won. And Fernando Alonso returned to Renault afterwards. Lewis assumed the team leader role in 2008, though. He had 5 victories, was on the podium 6 other times. A lot of the drivers had issues with him, though. They said his driving was dangerous and that he was arrogant. Sounds a lot like Max. I think they have a lot more in common than they would like to admit. Lewis believed that he was being wrongly interpreted and that his driving was firm but fair. In order to win the championship, Lewis was going to have to get at least 5th place or better in Brazil, which was going to be the last race. And Ferrari's Felipe Massa would take the title if he won his home race and Lewis did worse than 5th place. So basically, he just had to get 5th or better. Brazil was very hectic, when is it not, with the rain, but Lewis finished in 5th, which is all he needed to win the championship. With this final flourish, having overtaken another car about 300 meters to go, Lewis Hamilton, at that point 23 years old and 300 days, became the youngest world champion. This is a side note, in a bunch of the articles, they mentioned that this was when Lewis was dating Nicole Scherzinger of the Pussycat Dolls. So when you see like images or videos of her from when she was a wag, it was during this time.
How old was she?
I don't know. I've got issues with her.
We have problems, but anyway, we move
For the next few years, he was still one of the best drivers on the grid, but the car just wasn't the best, and he blamed some personal issues on his lack of performance. So in 2009, he was 5th. In 2010, he was 4th. In 2011, he was 5th. And in 2012, he was 4th again. So 5th, 4th, 5th, 4th. He announced that he would be moving to Mercedes in the 2013 season to replace Michael Schumacher. A lot of people said that his move from McLaren to Mercedes had like similar energy to what his move from Mercedes to Ferrari has. And I have to say, reading about it, it makes sense because he had so much success at first with McLaren and then it just dropped off and they couldn't make the best car. And he had so much success with Mercedes, but then it dropped off and they couldn't make a good car. And it was like, just make a new move, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, but like, isn't that like the basic of like any corporate growth that they tell you, like if you find yourself at a place that like you're stuck, like you have to jump ship. Like,
yes, he just did a basic job.
Yeah, he just did a basic
Nothing crazy.
job change, and everyone instead is like, the house is on fire.
But yeah, in 2013, he said he was going to go to Mercedes and replace Michael Schumacher. His first year at Mercedes, he finished fourth overall in the World Drivers' Championship. In 2014, though, there would be a regulation change where it was going to be a hybrid power unit from now on. And Mercedes dominated the season with 16 out of 19 wins as a team. This was when Lewis and Nico were teammates. Just a reminder. Nico Rosberg, in case you don't know. Mercedes had a policy of allowing them to race each other, which made it an intense rivalry. They had been friends since childhood, but also like rivals on the track. And this rivalry put a really big strain on their relationship. This is the bro-sadies that everybody talks about. Lewis was leading in points, but Rosberg was still in contention leading into the last race of the season, which was at Abu Dhabi, which always seems to be the craziest. I hate when everything leads into the last race, but it also makes it exciting. Apparently, double points were awarded at this last race this season for some reason. I don't know why. Who knows? But Nico Rosberg, who started from pole and won the inaugural pole position trophy, but he finished out of the points with a car problem. And he was very gracious in the defeat and acknowledged that Lewis's tally of 11 wins to his 5 meant that Lewis obviously deserved to be the 2014 champion. In 2014, Lewis clinched his second World Drivers' Championship, also became the most successful British driver in history with 33 victories, and that was in 2014. 2015, he dominated the season. The Mercedes car was basically unstoppable. He won his third World Drivers' Championship at race 16 of 19, which was at the U.S. Grand Prix in Austin, Texas. It was a wet to drying track. Nico was on pole, but Lewis passed him on the first lap. And this was his 10th win of the year, a historic 43rd career victory that vaulted him into third place in the all-time winners list behind Michael Schumacher and Alain Prost. The third World Drivers' Championship also matched the tally of Senna, who was his childhood hero. In 2016, Nico won the World Drivers' Championship. Lewis had some mechanical issues throughout that year, and people claimed he was distracted by his quote-unquote celebrity lifestyle, which he denies. In 27, I think it was just beef. 2017, Lewis won his 4th driver's title. Also 2016, after he won his title, Nico retired. He was like, one and done, peace out. That's all I needed. In 2017, Lewis won his 4th driver's title, matching Alain Prost and Sebastian Vettel's record. Only 2 drivers were more successful based on stats, Juan Manuel Fangio with 5 and Michael Schumacher with 7. At this point, he was regarded as one of the best drivers of his era. In 2017, Bottas was his new teammate, and he won 3 races, but their relationship was harmonious. He finished 3rd in the overall standings, Valtteri Bottas. I think the battle and loss to Nico kind of changed something in him. I think he's always been a hard worker and he's always been a talented driver, but they I don't know, it almost broke something in him to lose to Nico for a year.
I wonder if it was less broke and more just that path of maturity that
Probably.
you have to grow up a little bit through all those the losses. You can't just continue with the childhood rivalries, because I mean,
yeah,
I wonder if he had to grow up a little bit.
Yeah.
Not saying that he wasn't, I don't want him to feel insulted, but
2018, he won his 5th World Drivers' Championship, matching Juan Manuel Fangio's record. The 2018 season, he won 11 races. He had 11 poles and 17 podiums in the 21 races. He led Mercedes to a 5th consecutive Constructors' Championship. In 2018, Ferrari had 6 wins, and Red Bull had 4 wins, though, so they were starting to sneak up. In 2019, Lewis won his 6th World Drivers' Championship. In 2019, Mercedes won their 6th consecutive World Constructors' Championship, but their car was not as dominant as before. Lewis Hamilton led the charge, though, outscoring his teammate Valtteri Bottas 11 victories to 4, and leading the league in terms of consistently delivering points. He was the only driver to score in every race, finishing on the podium in all but 4 events. 2019 was also the year that Niki Lauda had passed away. The FIA F1 race director, Charlie Whiting, passed away. And same with Antoine Hubert, the Formula 2 driver who had that horrific crash at Spa, had passed away. So it was a tough year in motorsport. More than ever, also, Lewis was using his platform for social good. That's something that he's very well known for. 2020 obviously was a very hectic season because of COVID. There were 17 races and 23 weekends in 12 countries. I'm a little surprised that they traveled as much as they did, to be honest.
Okay, we didn't watch then, right?
No.
That is crazy,
Yeah.
knowing how much they traveled, how many people had to travel.
In 23 weekends, too, which means they only had 5 weekends off, 6 weekends off.
Just from, like, a COVID standpoint, internationally.
Yeah, problematic.
Anyways.
2020 was also the year that Romain Grosjean had that really fiery, insane crash. 2020 was the year that Lewis won his 7th World Drivers' Championship and his last one as of right now. This tied him with Michael Schumacher. At this point, he was 35 years old, and it was a record-setting season. He achieved 11 wins, 10 poles, 14 podiums, and this made him statistically the most successful F1 driver ever. At the end of it, his 14-year, 266-race career had thus far produced 95 wins, 98 poles, 165 podiums, as well as putting him atop several other categories with no signs of him slowing down at this point. Lewis had actually missed the second to last race because he was sick with COVID, and then he raced in the last race of that season, but he placed third because he was still feeling quite sick. This 2020 became very, very vocal and supported causes such as human rights, children's welfare, environmental stability, animal welfare, disaster relief, and especially racial equality and diversity. Then we get to 2021, and it claims to be one of his hardest seasons in the sport. 2021 was the year that Max won the World Drivers' Championship for the first time. So in 2021, Max had crashed violently into the barriers at Silverstone and had to be brought to the hospital for tests. Lewis won that race despite a time penalty since the stewards blamed him for the crash. And then at Monza, both of them DNF'd because Max's car ended up on top of Lewis's. And Lewis literally had a tire mark on his helmet. So the halo is literally probably the only reason why he's alive. And this was Lewis's first non-finish in 63 races. The second to last race, Lewis won, even though he crashed into Max, which he claimed was Max brake testing him. At this point, Max had 9 wins this season, and Lewis had 8, and they were even in points going into Abu Dhabi, the last race. The Abu Dhabi incident occurred, as we all know, of the safety car situation and everything else. And Max won his first World Drivers' Championship that year. There's been... Some people say that Lewis handled it not great, but all of these articles were saying that he handled it like a champ, which is interesting. So apparently Lewis handled it very humbly. And he visited the Mercedes factory days later to thank the team for everything, for trying their hardest. Then a couple days later, he was then knighted by Prince Charles at Windsor Castle. So he's only been Sir Lewis Hamilton since 2021. I thought it was earlier than that, but 2022, Lewis failed to win a single race for the first year of his career. He finished 6th in the driver's standing, 2 spots behind George Russell, his teammate. He made 10 trips to the podium and scored in all but 2 races. Mercedes finished 3rd in the Constructors' Championship behind Red Bull and Ferrari. In 2023 and 2024, he continued to struggle with the car. In 2024, a bit before the season started, it was announced that he would be going to Ferrari at the beginning of 2025. In the 2024 season, he did have several podiums, including 2 wins, one of which happened at his home race at Silverstone, which was really special to see. And now for Ferrari, we don't know how it's going to go. I'm very interested to see how things are between him and Charles. We shall see.
Yeah.
But that is the life, history, career of Lewis Hamilton.
To this day, of this so far.
Yes, so far. Because he has much life left to live and much career to finish still.
to drive.
I don't want to jinx that. Okay, we are gonna do our final thoughts. Do you have anything?
I mean, I think there does seem to be, from the few social media posts, and again, the one thing that I think everyone can take away from Drive to Survive that have watched is that Ferrari's PR team is intense. And so, the beauty of F1 is that who knows what's real and what's not real, because it's all entertainment. And so, I hope that all of the positive, and I do think we're seeing a different side of Lewis that since we've watched the sport, we haven't seen. There seems to be an excitement. I mean, it's
in the words of Sebastian Vettel, when you tell a kid to draw a car and color it in, they're going to color it red.
Yeah. And I think that there is something, regardless of the results, and I know people will be up in arms of that, but regardless of the results, I think there's something just so monumentally important to seeing Lewis Hamilton in a Ferrari for a season.
Yeah.
If it's just a season, if it's more, who cares? But there's something so, I don't know, symbolically for the sport, but also just for who he is as a driver. I hope that the excitement.
Well, I think it's also for who he is as a driver and what he represents and what he vocally stands for, and for a historical team like Ferrari.
Yeah.
Because everybody knows who Lewis is, everybody knows what he stands for, and if you don't align with that, even though he's the best driver in the world, what we considered, statistically, if you don't align with that, you wouldn't put him on your team.
Yeah,
Hopefully.
I'm super pumped, just to kind of see the how the two tie together. Now, in regards to teammates,
that's going to be the most interesting part, because I think that they are going to be neck and neck for a good while. And I think that it's going to be not the happiest sometimes, because I don't think that either one of them are used to not being number one.
Yeah. And that's what I think. I think it's been quite a lot of years of
Charles
being on
is
top.
il predestinato, and Lewis is Lewis.
Yeah.
So it's going to be an interesting dynamic change.
Yeah. So, I don't know what the future will hold. I don't think anyone really knows what it is. I think we're all just kind of excited to see Lewis in a Ferrari for the first time.
I wonder if we'll get more. This is one of the things that people have talked about, is because Ferrari does a lot of social media and a lot of PR stuff. I wonder if we will get more videos with Lewis in them, because he opts out of basically all social media stuff for teams in the past.
That also felt like a really big push for Ferrari with Charles and Carlos. It was just the level of social media that the two of them did together as teammates. And so for me, I'm you're right. I mean, we haven't really seen Lewis have to embrace. I mean, he himself is a brand, he doesn't have to embrace
Lewis does the
stupid TikTok.
He does the post-race and post-qualifying interviews in the media tent because he has to. But outside of that, he doesn't even participate in, what is it?
Grill the Grid?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't even participate in that most of the time. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm also intrigued because Ferrari was always something that always bugged me about Charles and Carlos, is that they would come in the Ferrari, they had to wear the Ferrari t-shirts. They had to dress a specific way, and Lewis never did that at Mercedes. He would wear a Mercedes quarter zip to the press conferences, but he would still be wearing his fashionable outfits on top of that. And so I'm interested to see if because Ferrari does have a fashion line. I'm interested to see if there is a Lewis Hamilton Ferrari fashion line collab, or if they allow Lewis to dress however he wants through using the fashion line.
Well, the other thing is too is like I said, Lewis Hamilton himself is a brand, right? So Lewis might have deals. I think he is a brand ambassador for Louis Vuitton, and
I think so,
he is one of the chairs for the Met. So I can't imagine
that's
that
also a huge.
Well,
wait a second.
That's the thing. So he's the chair for the Met this year.
First Monday of May is usually the
And so I'm curious to see, one, if we're gonna see other drivers at the Met because he's on the on the board. The other thing is too,
I wonder if we'll
because
see
he's
young, like
but the thing is too, I wonder, because of the theme of the Met, I think that's why he wore what he wore to Ferrari, that image that made like every woman
yeah,
like lose her
the
mind,
suit.
the suit. I think we're gonna see like he probably has an entire fashion story figured out, or his team is working on it right now.
Oh yeah.
And so I'm curious to see if like Charles is gonna up his game. Now, granted, again, the clothes they walk into the paddock are not the reason why we watch the sport, but it's just like they
It's
all have
part
their
of
hand
Lewis.
in so many things. Like Charles has his ice cream and Alex has his like his shoes, but like Lewis is,
They all started doing that stuff because of
yeah.
Lewis.
And so I'm just curious because, you know, Ferrari has been strict about what their drivers wear, about what their drivers say, and stuff like that. And I wonder if with like Lewis, like
Well, I think also
it's a
because
whole
the
nother.
FIA have basically said that you can't say anything somewhat political or even social. But literally, the theme of the Met Gala this year is fine black tailoring,
Mhm.
and I wonder if Lewis is just going to use his fashion as a actual statement of what he wants
I
to
mean,
say but can't.
it wouldn't be the first time.
Yeah,
You know, your clothing can make just as big of a statement as your words, and
literally, Sebastian Vettel showing up to Hungary in an entire rainbow outfit when they outlawed gay marriage.
yeah. So I don't know. I think it's gonna be really interesting to see how Ferrari themselves deal with the storm of Lewis and the
Yeah.
brand of Lewis, because I think Mercedes kind of, you know, while he was big when he was first joining, I think he's become even more international sense, and
Even if you don't
so
know F1,
F1,
everyone knows who Lewis Hamilton is, I feel like. I mean, I knew who he was before we started watching
yeah.
F1.
So I'm excited, but
Yeah.
I hope you guys enjoyed this little dive into Ferrari's newest driver and Ferrari as a team and as a person.
Yeah. Next episode that will be coming out it's either going to come out in like a week or two. It'll be the first thing that we post in March. It will be for Women's History Month. So we are going to be doing a specific episode on women in motorsport. So definitely keep an eye out for that. And we are doing a lot of prep for this upcoming season. So we are getting a lot of stuff ready. So we hope you guys like it.
The other thing is, for those, we'll try to repost as much as possible, but it's going to be a busy like next 2 weeks because this is when all of the liveries and the cars and everything come out.
Yes.
And that giant like O2 event for F1 is happening, which I'm just so curious. I keep thinking it's going to be the Victoria's Secret fashion show, but with cars.
I keep thinking it's going to be
'Cause
the Hunger Games tribute parade, but with
I
cars.
think it's going to be a mix of the two ideas that
It'll
we
be an
have.
interesting experience for
I'm
sure.
curious to see if they're going to have any, like, famous, like, obviously famous, but,
They
like,
are.
any
There's an
musical
entire.
guests. Is there an
Oh, I think they
entire...
are.
Yeah. It'll be weird. Anyways, I think, all of that's happening over the next 2 weeks, including all of the team's own livery releases.
Yeah, they're all having their own individual ones, and then they're having the actual.
I guess
big
they all
one.
have empty schedules right now since there's no
Why don't y'all save the
races.
money for when you have a car crash?
Yeah.
That would make sense. But anyways.
What do we know?
Yeah, what do we know? So, yeah, make sure you go and follow us on all of our socials, on Instagram, on YouTube, subscribe, and everything else. One thing that I'd be interested to hear some of your opinions on, I was thinking about us potentially making a Substack or like a Discord or something where we can all chat if we want to. If people are interested in that, let us know in the comments and we will start that. If you're not, please let us know as well and we won't start it if you don't want to hear from us. It's totally fine. All right, I think that's everything for today.
Yeah.
All right, bye guys.
Bye.